Chapter 11 is a little more difficult. An abused child is really, at times I'll mention throughout the lecture that it's really above your pay grade, especially severe ones. The most common to you will be neglect, and I try and make that case real strong in the lecture. But nonetheless, if you're working in a low-income school, this will be more of an issue for you than if you're not in a low-income school. It has some graphic pictures and stuff that aren't very fun to look at, and some things that aren't real fun to deal with. But nonetheless, it talks about this, and I'll say it to you here. You will have a legal obligation to report suspected abuse. And in there, Dr. Rojas Cortez talks about that you have some immunity if it's proven to be false, but always want to err on the side of the child. But this is going to be one of your responsibilities as an educator, and most of first initial reports come from this. So chapter 11. Chapter 11 on the abused child is laid out pretty well here, and a lot of things that we'll cover fairly quickly on how to do this, and I'm just going to bust through. I'm going to ask you to bring stuff in here also. So that's kind of how it's laid out. So let's take off on it here. Let me get to the textbook here. This first part here talks about John Lennon's song, Imagine. Talks about living a life of peace, and it makes this case of what this would be like to live, in fear if you're children and stuff. And you got to just kind of follow along with it here, what your responsibility is. First of all, what is child abuse? And according to the Child Abuse Prevention Treatment Act of '74, so that was the first national piece of legislation, was the Child Abuse Prevention Treatment Act in '74, Public Law 9342. And here's the definition, and it's the same as it is here: physical or mental injury, sexual abuse, negligent treatment of or maltreatment of a child under the age of 18 by a person responsible. And this is a little bit interesting here, because why I want to highlight that is that sometimes this abuse can happen, and the chapter does not talk about this at all. But you could have high school kids that are abused and don't know it. For one thing, if they're intimate with, underage girls are intimate with boyfriends that are older, and sometimes it gets too embarrassing to talk about it, so it gets a little tougher as they get older. We think of little kids, and the chapter is about little kids. It's very interesting in this definition that it has 18. But by a person who is responsible. And this, I say, is neglect when we let these kids run. And I've worked with families where the parents got in trouble where the kid would be gone for 3 days. The 14-year-old wouldn't come home for 3 days, and the parents didn't report anything. That's abuse by neglect. So circumstances would indicate child's health or welfare. And I say if they're running all night and drinking and stuff, why? And then they also have one for maltreatment from 2011 from this. It's called Center for Disease and Control and Prevention. Any acts or series of acts of commission or omission, something they do or don't do. And that's what up here also. It can be things they do or omissions don't do can be considered abuse by a parent or other caregiver that results in harm, potential for harm, or threat of harm to a child. Okay. Let me go back to the text here quick. So that's what that's about. Here's that definition. And then it starts to go into some of these images that are pretty graphic. This is interesting here that estimated over 300 million children around the world are subject to many types of abuse and maltreatment. It doesn't say annually, but I'm assuming. UNICEF works diligently to eradicate violence and abuse from the lives of children. So that's UNICEF's role. And what I want you to do here on on the notes is this first one. This will be our first one. Is I want you to tell me what this is and what the role is. Tell me what UNICEF stands for and what their role is, what they do. And you can bring this right back here, what the role says here. And there are many family funds. We've had that term before. Funds of knowledge can help prevent child abuse and neglect. And again, this seems such a simple topic, but you're going to find as we talk about this, it's really not. It's not simple. Background for centuries have been prevalent. Abuse has been prevalent in many societies. It goes on to this part here talking about how children were, and in many countries still are, seen as property, as chattel, as property, and they can do what they want. They can be sold, loved, killed, whatever they seem different, needs to be done. And I talked about the 1800s. It wasn't common for children to work 12 hours a day or the threat of great beatings. I was never that threat, but I was not unusual by the time I was 13, 14 to work longer than 12 hours a day on the farm. I suppose I was abused. I was just not bright enough to know I was being abused when I was taught to work hard. And I think more so my children are abused today because they don't have any work to do. Is that bad? Yeah, well that's... they're cheap, useful laborers, and my dad always says by the time I was really good help, I left home and went off to college, so he felt abused in that. Wasn't until 1874 in New York City that the first child case was reported, and it talks about here, it involved a 9-year-old girl who had been beaten daily by her parents, was severely malnourished or undernourished when found by church workers because they were agencies to deal with the child abuse. The workers turned the American Society of Prevention and Cruelty to Animals. Isn't that interesting? They went to the Humane Society. Okay, 1 year later, New York Society of Prevention and Cruelty to Children was organized, later called the American Humane Association, began addressing the issues. American Humane Association. And then mounting concerns over working conditions of the care of children accumulated in 1909. First White House Conference on Children resulted in 1912 legislation. And again, I take you back here to see that, here, link to the website there too, please. That's what I want you to do. First of all, what does it stand for? What year? Where are the headquarters? And then just a link to that website. Then here, this is just some of those backgrounds. That first case is reported. Then had this society, Humane Association, and then this first White House Conference, and then really not much from the 20s and 50s, other than they started to find that X-rays could help prove abuse. And again, to me, it's so extreme. Broken bones are so extreme. I mean, it's sad and it's horrible, but I can almost assure you in your work that your work will be above that level. If you're working with broken bones and stuff, that's way above your pay grade as a teacher. That hopefully comes out and is dealt with long before that. In 1962, this battered child syndrome article was published. I think there's a question on the test about that, what that was about. What is that? What did that mean? We'll get to that in a second. All states had child abuse reporting legislations by 1967. And that doesn't seem very long ago. It does long ago to you, but that's not very long ago to me. And then National Center for Child Abuse and Neglect was created. And let me jump back to the textbook here. So then here's 13, Dr. Gaffney. He was the one that worked first with, broken bones and being able to x-ray. And then here it goes. It was an article by Kemp, Silverman, and Steele in 1962 that battered child syndrome that brought national attention to the abused child. And really was an eye-opening to a lot of folks that didn't realize the extent that was going on. And here's the thing with x-rays where they could start to they would accept x-rays as proof to determine abuse. And that's when the term battered was first coined. And that's still kind of a ugly word that when you hear that word battered, it conjures up, it bubbles up images, I think, of what that means. And so after that happened in 1967, the national response, and that's what this title is here, was that they came up with legislation. Then in '67, by then, all states had this legislation of how to report the child abuse. So there are no provisions for the coordination of it. So you could go from one state to another and have different standards of what that was and how to repair it. So then this National Center of Child Abuse and Neglect, NCAN here, was created in '74, hence that page. And so it was just a national clearinghouse. And after they established this, child abuse was funded, your federal dollars. The purpose was to conduct research determining the cause of child abuse and neglect, and its identification and prevention and incidence of child abuse in the nation. And reporting of child abuse and neglect has been conducted in a variety of organizations, and it goes through some of those who got involved with that. And of course, all kinds of organizations were started to get in on this money. And then this national child abuse neglect system was started. Okay. And then this on domestic violence. And again, when you hear that, that's been really brought to the forefront in the last 10 years, and it's got a face now and a movement. And so it's no longer a hidden secret, and it talks about here considered to be a major health problem that affects tens of millions of families. It seems like a high number to me, but I don't live in the area where this happens. Very often our victims of abuse, or their children are victims of abuse. And then it talks about this website here and how to do it. And then what are the effects of that violence on children? Well, medically fragile infants appear to be at the highest risk of abuse, particularly if their family has a history of social problems, including domestic violence, mental illness, and substance abuse. And so often those same things produce children, and often more than many children that are out of wedlock and out of structured families, and become very high risk at your school. Treatment with parents socially abuse each other, and that's interesting too. Do you realize that? So don't you be this kind of parents, but if the parents are psychologically abusing each other, they tend to psychologically abuse the children too. And you can imagine that if parents are psychologically abusing each other, that they would use that same weaponry on the children. Imperative for to provide resources for this. Child abuse around the world, and this is really interesting, where and I'm not sure why Dr. Rojas Cortez goes into this global look at it, but she really takes a global look right here of what it is. And you'll want to do this also on here. This is domestic. Why I'm putting these up here specifically is that it in the textbook and on the test it asks you the highest forms of things, Saudi Arabia, Australia. So you want to put this in the notes too, and we will make this number 2 here, our number 2 entry. And I say it's on the test too, but Saudi Arabia, first case of child report was the most common type of abuse in Saudi Arabia is physical abuse, and that's what you want, because that's what's on the test. And I say again, I don't understand, Dr. Rojas Cortez, why that's an important distinguishment here. In Australia, most common abuse is emotional, and for many gypsy children in Albania, trafficking. Do you need that word? It appears to be a major instances connected contextual issues of poverty, internal and external migrations, discrimination problems in the legal system. Do you know what trafficking is? Again, I'm going to ask you to come here and talk about trafficking right here. Not bad for my mouse, huh? Trafficking and what that means here. And this will be our third thing, our third entry. All right. And this isn't in there, but streets in India have many kinds of abuse, with young males being reported being abused more than females. Children look for a better place to live outside the country, being abused by the caregivers. And down here, neglect and corporal punishment are 2 issues related to abuse that seem to be prevalent in many countries. Neglect, corporal punishment. Punishment meaning just that thing of abuse. Right? And it goes on to some of these other countries and what some of their issues are. So who are these victims? Well, Child Help indicates that 5.8 million children were involved in 3.2 million child abuse reports. And who are they? They are the agency that gives you a clearinghouse to report this. It is estimated that child abuse is reported every 10 seconds. And that seems high to me. I guess I live in a pretty insulated world. Neglect is the most frequent type, followed by physical abuse. Okay. Goes on to say, estimated that 1,760 child deaths due to abuse occur each year. And then figure 11.1 shows the maltreatment types of victims and shows the maltreatment types of child fatalities. It's also important to recognize some child are barriers related to child abuse. Who are the abusers? What does this here stand for again? NCANDS. I'm going to take you back here. Okay. Of all ages, be more at risk. 16% of this abusers. Okay. This is that clearinghouse. Over 80% of abusers are the victim's parents. Yes, harsh discipline sees the most prevalent of abusive parents. And I think it's less, but I grew up in a time where corporal punishment was accepted in the homes. It wasn't at school, but certainly was at the homes. Perpetrators of maltreatment are defined in most states as parents or other caregivers, including other relatives, foster parents, and babysitters. And here's this thing, the most common type in the United States is neglect. And so this is yours. And let me just tell you a little bit about neglect. And if I can, I'm just going to go on camera here so you can see me. Let me tell you my experience with this. I had a boy in my class, an 8th grader, that moved in during the year, did not start the year with us. And the first thing, his issue was he couldn't stay awake. He always had his head down, and everybody was on him. And his other issue was he didn't have any friends. He didn't talk to anybody. He didn't do anything. And his name was Matt. And I started work with him and got him doing some work. So he was starting to succeed a little bit, but he was so dirty. And it wasn't a time. This was in their mid-90s. And what was really popular at the time was these starter football jackets. And he had a Baltimore Colts. You heard me. Baltimore Colts jacket. And he wore it every day, and he wore it all day in school, and it was so dirty, and it smelled so bad. And finally, out of frustration, I wanted to talk to his parents, who I had met the mother, but had never met the father. And of course, I found they didn't have phones, and this is pre-cell phone age, of course, but they had no phone. So one night, he got in trouble in school and had to stay after. And I said to him right away, I'll give you a ride home. Any way to call the parents. And of course, my plan was to see his parents and really kind of let him know, number one, that he was tired all the time, but number two, how dirty he was. I get to this home, and first of all, it looks like a vacant house. It doesn't look like anybody lives there. It doesn't look hardly livable. And there's no way of calling, so we're walking up the street, and I hear this scurrying in there. So I get in there, and only the father and mother are there, and there's the only thing I can see is a card table with some chairs around it, and there's no furniture besides that. And so I'm trying to discreetly look around, and I can see that there's sleeping bags in the family room all over the place. And once they figure out in conversation that I'm not social services or I'm not the police, people start coming, and there's in no time there must be 6 or 8 children around there, and at least 3 other adults. Not sure why. But there's no dishes or nothing, and so there's all kinds of garbage around. They're eating out of bags, lots of McDonald's bags and garbage and stuff. And what I quickly realized, these people look just like Matt. They are so dirty and smell so bad, and they're all smoking. All the adults are smoking. The place is just one big cloud. And I suddenly had a change of heart that I wasn't going to talk about this at all. And I had a nice conversation with him and got to know him a little bit, but this coat thing persists. So finally, I got to a point where it was causing problems. So I said to Matt, you know, if you don't get this clean, Matt, I'm going to have to wash it. And this is going to seem odd, but I taught in a classroom where it actually used to be the office for the home ec classroom, but the washer and dryer was in there for the home ec program. And so one day it was so bad in class that I was getting sick, and I said, Matt, I'm going to wash the coat. And so I started the washing machine and started filling it with water. And he like usual, Matt wouldn't say anything. So finally it came to a point I took it off him forcibly and put it in the washing machine. And he really went off and screamed and cried. And of course the clothes he had underneath were dirty. He wore the same outfit every day, the same starter shirt, the same designer jeans, and this coat every day, exactly the same, never changed, never washed. And this was early afternoon, so we had class, and he was shot. He was bawling, and he wouldn't talk to me. So he came down there after school because he had no coat. It was cold, and of course he could not believe his eyes when he saw it. That it was clean and dried, and it was beautiful again. It was bright and washed up really nice. And then he never spoke of that again. And I'm not so sure I would do that today, but at the time I was young and brass and thought that was the thing to do. And I think it changed his life that day after the washing. I mean, he was pretty mad, but that's the line of neglect that was neglect to me, not to his family. And so and the other story I have about this that I want to let you know about, and that is I had a student in this program one time that came in my office and was a wreck, bawling and crying and stuff, which I don't do very good for him. I don't know why. That's, but her thing was that she had had a visit from social services, child protection, to her house that morning because one of the kids went to school, had a nick on their head, and the kids had gotten into a fight that morning, and had one had thrown a toy and caught and had a cut, and she's pretty sure that somebody from school had called child protection about this. And they came to see her, and she was devastated and assured me it wasn't abuse, but just absolutely was devastated. And the case I'll make with this, and we'll talk a little bit later here, that you have a responsibility to report abuse, but just know what you're doing. You cannot unring a bell. Once the bell's been rung, even if it's retracted, even if it's proven false, you have, really severely challenged that family. Now, hear me, err on the side of protecting the child, but just make sure you know what you're doing, because she was devastated to think that somebody would think that her children were abused, that she had abused her children. And nothing ever came of it, but so that's my story about abuse and neglect. And the most common to you will be neglect. And your challenge on a daily basis will be, at what level is the neglect so bad that you have to do something about it? And the kinds, and I taught in the middle school, the kinds of neglect I saw regularly was kids with no bedtime. No bedtime. Go to bed whenever I want. Lots of issues, lots of tired kids. I remember one kid just out of control. And had all kinds of issues other than he couldn't stay awake. But finally, in confronting him, what was with all this sleeping, he said, well, I stay up late and watch movies. And I said, well, why are they letting you stay up so late? He said, well, that's when the naked movies come on. And that was the thing. We're starting to really had some sexual things going on, was saying some suggestive things. So I called this mother to talk about being tired and you know, some of his things he was saying, and she just went off on me and said, you know, I don't have any problems with him at home. I don't know why you're bringing your problems here. I mean, if you can't get him to stay awake, keep him after school or whatever. But I don't feel like fighting him about you know, going to bed when he's not causing any problems at home. So that's kind of the end of that conversation. But that's kind of the extent. But I had lots of kids that didn't have bedtimes. And here's what happens, Alice, the kids that don't have bedtimes, whether they're kindergartners or middle school or high school kids. What happens, and my kids, believe me, my kids have got into this cycle, but if you're staying up late without bedtimes, often what goes with it is a lot of eating and snacking and stuff. And so your bedtime gets out of whack, but also your eating cycle's out of whack. So when you get up in the morning, not hungry. We talk about kids coming to school without breakfast. The thing we never talk about is the reason a lot of them come to school without breakfast, when they'll come and say, I never had breakfast, isn't because they didn't have food in the house. It's because they stayed up late, ate all night, got up in the morning, their tummy's full, they're not hungry at all, and about 10 o'clock they haven't anything to eat. I have a struggle with my kids where they're not hungry in the morning if they've been up late. Because generally, like I say, involves is late snacks and stuff. And so that's never discussed, but I know that from a fact. And that's, I had a mother tell me that one time when I was saying, what's a mother say when you say to her, gee, he comes and says he hasn't had breakfast? And she said, well, I offer breakfast every morning and he won't eat. He's not hungry. I didn't say the reason he wasn't hungry was because he had too much to eat the night before, but those are just some of the things. But our biggest one in this country, and your challenge will be this one, neglect. And so what level of that is acceptable and can you deal with? And you have to kind of monitor it. And this is interesting too, the different type of maltreatments. Multiple ones at the most, but neglect again, physical abuse, and gives those. And this is interesting too, that in this organization, Child Report, one talks about who are the victims in their relationships. That parents are 81% of the perpetrators, but they even broke it into mothers and fathers. And isn't this interesting that the mother is more likely? And then it gives you these smaller instances here, which the big message here is that the parents are 81% of the time. So then we get into this child abuse categories. Let me jump here. See, 80% are parents. Here's the one I wanted. Tell me what this acronym is. Again, here. Tell me what that stands for. This will be our fourth input to the notes here. All right, so here's the child abuse categories. And what I want you to do is go ahead and talk about each of these. For example, neglect, and I'll put this in the notes, but I want you to give a brief description of physical, educational, and emotional. Have you ever heard that, educational neglect? Isn't that interesting? I find that very interesting. But here's the physical neglect, pattern to provide the necessities, adequate shelter, care, supervision, food, clothing, and protection. Now, what does that mean? How does this happen? And I think that's with a lot of these. But let me just take you off this. And again, I thought Dr. Rojas Cortez would talk about this, but since she hasn't, I'm going to. Okay, let me go find what I'm going to talk about. Here's where I'm coming, is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When we talk about the textbook here about physical neglect being this of adequate shelter, care, supervision, food, clothing, and protection. The thing it doesn't talk about is, in Maslow says, the first level of self-actualization is this physiological. Breathing, food, water, sex, sleep, homeostasis, excretion, being able to excrete, poop. You know, if a parent is at this level just worried about providing food and water, and to me, I don't know how sex fits in there. It's just a bizarre, part of it here. But even sleep. Okay, if I'm struggling to provide these for you, or even safety, if I'm struggling in there, how in the world can I possibly think about providing these other things like educational needs and emotional need? If I'm worried every day about feeding you, having enough food, and having a safe place, I can't imagine how you would function any other way. And this is what I found working with kids from all these low-income homes was these and 90% of the times they were single parents. They were so overwhelmed with their life emotionally, physically, and spiritually, that there was nothing left for these children. They were working at entry-level jobs, dealing with alcohol abuse and substance abuse, dealing with the different men coming in and out of their homes. The last thing that they had anything to give to was this educational need of their child. They did not see that as being on their plate. They did not see that as coming in here at all, because they were functioning down here at this bottom one. And if you're functioning down here, you're not worried about things above. And Maslow tells you until these are met, you can't worry about the safety. Until all the safety things are met, you can't worry about love and belonging. Until they're met, you can't worry about self-esteem. Not that you don't want to, you just don't have anything to give to it. And I thought Dr. Rojas Cortez negates bringing that into this conversation. Parents are either able or unwilling to give proper care. And for them, I'd say the ones I worked with were unable to give that proper care. That I say they would provide whatever they could for food. It was up to the child to feed themselves and get themselves off. And so you bring that in, and it's this part here, this adequate shelter, care, and supervision, food, clothing, and protection. That's what I want you to bring in. It's either the failure to provide or this necessities. And then in educational, when parents permit chronic truancy, fail to make sure the child attends school, fail to attend. Again, I'm going to say a lot of times I saw because the child didn't want to go and they were so overwhelmed they didn't have the strength to make the child go. And especially they get to middle school, and it talks here that some other things can be in play. Then this emotional neglect includes refusal to provide psychological help the child needs, exposure to the child to abuse someone else, permission for the drugs, and they can be psychologically unavailable to the child, ignoring the child's need and comfort. And again, I'm saying it depends where they're functioning. And then we get into this thing of physical abuse, and here's this is the way it's asked on the test: is what is it? It's this welts, cuts, bruises, burns, or fractures is what physical abuse is. And I think that's I want you to bring that in here also. So this will be our number 5 entry. Is that? Or this is 5 up here for these. This will be number 6 here. Heck, let's just make this whole thing. Let's make this whole thing number 5 for this whole page here. It'll be number 5. We'll have number 6 on the other one. Okay. So physical abuse and let me back up. I think I have to stick with that, or you'll miss some of this. Okay, 5 is this one. 6 is this one. 7, 8, and 9 is the 9 types, and this is your 10th entry here. Where does it come from? And let me just take you through these again here. All right, physical abuse are these, but it says here that to recognize physical abuse, it does this: how many bruises and abrasions are accidental. Others give cause for the teacher to believe that they were intentionally inflicted. Bruises are the most common symptoms of physical abuse. Other signs include welts, lumps, ridges on the body, usually caused by a blow, burns, shown of redness, blistering, or this. Head Start personnel are given the guidelines with 4 criteria. And here I want you to bring these 4 criteria in. First is the location of the injury. Then the evidence of repetition of the injury. Third is the criteria of the injury is it obvious that the bruise, cut, or burn was inflicted by an object such as belt, stick, or cigarette, and the caregiver or teacher should respect or suspect abuse. And the fourth is correlation between the injury and the explanation that given by the child. And so that is, again, how to recognize it, signs of injury that I want you to talk about in here. Bring those 4 things in here. Okay, so it's very interesting what you would look for. And again, can I just give you rest assure here that these things are above your pay grade. I'm going to guess, unless you're in a very almost exclusive low-income school, that these issues will not be. And if they are, you need to immediately go to administration and ask for help on this, because in no way should you be dealing with this yourself. That this is becomes a collaborative effort by you. These are interesting. These typical and suspicious bruising areas. Okay, you don't. And it talks about here how you don't ever want to look under the clothes if you're wondering. That's again that's above your pay grade. You seek help. That's only done by a professional. And the other thing I was going to say here too is some of these bruising isn't intentional. Back here on this page is sometimes neglect is not giving the kid enough supervision, so they're getting hurt, letting them play with harmful things, stuff like that. But again, that's a bell. If you're going to ring that bell, you better have some evidence, because it's very hard to put that genie back in the bottle. Then this goes into the shaken baby syndrome, and it's a little out of our league, but I can see why she includes it here. It creates this trauma to the head. It often when does it happen? When they're these are graphic, aren't they? Holy smokes! Here on page 295. I don't even want to go there. I say I'm saying to you that's above your pay grade on these, and if you're in this area, you're out of your league here. And if you get here, you don't walk, you run, and you can't miss these here. But anyway, the shaken baby usually occurs when frustrated caregiver loses control. Okay. Purple Crimes Prevention Program includes an 11-page booklet about this. So, yeah, I mean, shaking, you've heard this. It's the subdural hemorrhaging, the brain swelling damage, and also result in developmental delays, intellectual disabilities, blindness, paralysis, hearing loss, all part of that. But generally, when they're frustrated is when the baby gets shook. Otherwise, especially if you have colicky sick babies, there was a lady, and this was 30-some years ago, from a community here in South Dakota that lost control. That she had a chronic, sick, crying baby, and one night she lost control and stabbed it, and was sentenced to a long prison term, and has served most of it. Still in prison. Emotional abuse as physical neglect. It's more difficult to identify to find a pattern behavior that can seriously interfere with a child's. I say so. Generally, this is a little out of your realm also, but it could be. Children are usually overly harsh and critical. They withhold love and acceptance and do not give the child either physical or verbal encouragement and praise. Now, again, in a lot of cultures, that's not done. And my father was a little bit that way. Not that he withheld love, but he was not very good about ever giving any verbal encouragement or praise. And the word I'll use is affirmation. And that's one thing that I struggle with, that I've really had to work with my kids hard, is to give them affirmation. And I have one son especially that really needs my affirmation. And I've learned to give that more freely. And I'll tell you, it's changing him, how he sees our relationship and stuff. But you don't get to mess with that. That's above your pay grade also. Here's what I want you to bring. Children who are constantly shamed, terrorized, humiliated, or rejected suffer at least as much, if not more, than they have been physically assaulted. That seems harsh, but I've heard that before, and that's what I want you to bring in here about emotional abuse right here with number 8, is that part right there. Okay. It can be more traumatizing than physical abuse. Okay. And then it goes into it here. Patterns can include the what's terrorizing, continued rejection of the child, refusal. And again, when you see this, folks, I don't know that you get to do anything about it. If nothing else, it may help you empathize with what's going on with the child. But you don't get to call up the principal and say, gee, I think they're terrorizing the child, or they're rejecting the child. Just a very peculiar thing that can be happening, but very tough to prove anything. Children who are not nurtured and who live in an emotionally insecure environment may show signs of low self-esteem, slow educational growth, and insecurity. So know that if you see kids that display these things, that often it is a tie back to this. And again, I say to you, you don't get to do anything about it. You don't get to really change that much. Just have empathy for the child. Okay, and then we get into, please read all this. It's a very good read about it. Sexual abuse is defined under the Child Abuse Prevention Treatment Act. Isn't that funny? We've got an acronym for everything we have in here. We do that, educators. Employment, use, persuasion, inducement, of enticement, or coercion of any child to engage in these sexual acts, the rape, and in cases of caretaker, interfamilial relations, statutory rape, molestation, prostitution, other form of sexual exploitations. So here's what I want you to bring in about this: is these categories, and they look like this: 9 different categories. And I want you to bring that in here. Here's the first 2: incest, pedophilia. Not fun things to even think about here. Exhibitionism, molestation, sexual intercourse, which is statutory rape, of course, and rape, sexual sadism, child pornography, child prostitution. It can be through trickery and force, but it's very interesting here about that this category is either contact or non-contact sexual abuse. And also you need to be able to separate these two out also. The contact is where there's actual touching sexual parts in the child, or having the child touch parts of somebody else. But the non-contact, or some of these others, exhibitionism, voyeurism, or making pornographic materials, well documented what these things are. But those are the 2 types of contact and non-contact, and sexual abuse is very difficult to detect. And this is what I say, especially as they get older, because sometimes it is, especially if it's consensual, it really can get icky. And again, folks, this is above your pay grade. If this is going on, get help, get professionals. This isn't the kind of thing you go down and gossip in the lounge about, but you have a conference with the principal and take it from there and do some investigation and stuff. And it's another one of those things that once you ring this bell, very hard to unring it. And I, for one, if someone suggested this was going on in my family, I can't imagine what you would say that would hurt me more. It goes on and says this has been around forever. Incest and other sexual abuse occur in all economic groups, and therefore teachers of all schools and child care settings. Yeah, and what it says this is true, because you can find it in middle class, upper class, just as well as low income areas. But it gives you a series of things of what to look for here. Obviously, one is pregnancy. I have a quick story about that. I had a young man. We had a very severely retarded girl in our class, in our school, and she was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, they determined she was 6 months pregnant, an 8th grader. And about within the next few weeks, they came and arrested her 14-year-old stepbrother, who also attended our school. And I don't think anything would have come had she not been pregnant. But he had raped her, and he confessed to the whole thing, and they took him off from our school in handcuffs. I didn't think I'd ever see him again, but he did come back. But yeah, this is a whole, these behavioral signs also. And then I'm not going to talk any more about this, but it goes on and on here. And then it down here it talks about how to deal with it. These different positions, how to deal with it here. Okay. Let me just go back here a second. One of the things I said come from here, I just wanted to make sure to say this about here, and I want you to put this in your notes, but one of the things that experience I've seen in this also is some of this abuse comes prior to their family. What does that mean? I worked with a lot of kids that were foster kids that were taken from a home, So think of this dynamic, how that changes, that they're holding a lot of these things in that were all prior things. And the prior may not even be their family. It may have been a prior foster. It may have been a prior, I remember one case where the little girl came to our school in foster care because she had an uncle that was molesting her. Now, it seems kind of weird, but here's what happens. About the time they start to hit puberty and their little body changes, the beauty of alcohol and drugs, it kind of changes your inhibitions, if you will. And so that she's new, and this is how I got to it. I'm doing an intake. Social services brings her. She's with this foster parent, so a social worker and a foster parent is there, and we're trying to figure out an IEP. And the social worker tells me in front of the child that she's a foster care and she was taken from the home because of sexual abuse by an uncle. I didn't quite understand that, but that's what it was. So this responsibility to report, school personnel and child care staff members have more than a moral responsibility. Reporting abuse helps with early detection. Laws in each state require, that's right, require you to report it. So what does that look like? Well, if it comes to find abuse and you had knowledge of this, you could be held liable. Now, relax, relax. This doesn't mean that if you don't do it, you get thrown in jail. But you do have some immunity from doing it. Here's the 4 categories of professional mandated reporting: medical, legal, human service professionals, and educators. No states require proof of the abuse before reporting it, and the reporters must report it if they have suspicion of maltreatment. Teachers, child care professionals, and others who report in good faith are immune from legal action. And like I said, I'll go back to what I said before. Make sure before you ring a bell that you know what you're doing, but you also have this responsibility, and therefore it is the fine line, and especially in neglect. Because what you may consider neglect in your middle class values is obvious neglect. You will quickly go to that home and they will not see it that way. And that's what we tend to do sometimes, is put our middle class glasses on and view families through our value system and not through theirs. But medical, legal, and human service professionals and educators are required if they have suspicion of it. Okay. Including suspected. So my first thing to you is, if you have suspicion, is you visit with a principal, because they often, number one, have more time and more experience and more resources to investigate and ask and check this out. But you are the initial, you are the frontline eyes and ears on reporting it. And this is, and I think this is actually on the test, is about child help. Provides a national child abuse hotline, U.S. territories, 24/7, 170 languages. 3 million cases reported annually. That is just unbelievable. Okay. Child Help provides national child hotlines dedicated to child abuse. According to Child Help, 3 million reports of that. And this is kind of interesting too. It gives you state-by-state contacts, and it's very interesting here in this textbook. Dr. Ross Cortez only has a phone number. I would assume a website, but nonetheless, it's very interesting here. But Child Protective Services, and I will say to you, I have called them. When I taught middle school, the one time I had a conversation, little girl coming to school every day so tired and wore out, and telling us that she's sleeping in the closet because her mom's boyfriend bothers her otherwise, and she slept in the closet and held the door shut on the closet. So the first time she said this, I got on the phone, called Child Protective Services, and said okay, and they wrote this down and stuff, and had this, they would look into it. Well, within a month or two, the same thing. I made a second call, but when I made the third call, she came and said, "I think I'm pregnant." She's a junior in high school at this time. And, oh, I should mention she has an IQ of 65. Okay? And what she tells was that she went in the truck with mom's boyfriend. Mom's boyfriend was a truck. And they had sex in there, and she thinks that's when she got pregnant. And so I got on the phone again, and I let this lady have it. And what she told me, and I didn't understand this till then, we have to build a case. One report from a teacher does not make a case be that they had enough now to go looking for this. And I don't know what happened to her from there, but she was pregnant with this mom's boyfriend's child in the back of the truck. So the school system in child abuse, because required school attendance and an increase in the use of child care centers, caregivers and teachers have an expanded opportunity for contact with families and children. Obviously down here, 70% of the children who are abused or neglected having contact with schools or child care have contact with centers. I would have thought higher, but it must be littler kids. It goes into this better information and reporting, talks about all that. You want to read through that. Let me just go back here for a second. School system have contact, 70%, which is, like I said, I would have thought higher than that, but I suppose the ones that don't attend, that's vital. The school must serve as a defense against child abuse in 3 ways: the referral agency, educational institution, support system for families, and collaborate with other agencies. Because it's also interesting to have them taken out of your school so quickly. You know, that they're in your school one day and the next day they're not because they're in foster care someplace. And again, folks, 90% of us will never deal with this unless you teach in a low-income school. And this is the newest one, this internet safety. And recent children using the internet have become vulnerable among pedophiles and pornographers and inadvertently become exposed, simply typing the word legs for Legos or several steps. And I would think you know, she would have developed this more, but it talks about blocking software on the internet and stuff. Parents, teachers must monitor their use of the computer, and I'm telling you, we got a bunch in our house, and it's easier said than done. Because you get lulled to sleep. They're fine, they're fine, they're fine, they're fine until they're not fine. And so that's what makes it hard. Teachers set up websites and control the children to be able to access. I have filters, but you know, when the kids get older, that filters don't mean anything to them, it seems like. But lots of harm, lots of documented things, harm have come to kids from contact on the internet. And then bullying refers to the repeated, unprovoked, harmful action of one child against another. And I think there's a question on the test that has just that one, has that stated that one way. Physical or emotional, and this is a little bit like before emotional, that sometimes the threat of harm, emotional includes teasing, threatening, taunting, calling names. And this gets a little dicey too because of this word is teasing. And here's where you'll get caught. And again, I don't think Dr. Rojas does a very good job of talking about this. But what happens is teasing is going back and forth, and all of a sudden one can't take it. And then somebody's in big trouble for bullying and teasing when it really was a two-way street. And what it really comes farther is that you and I both lived through this is, where's the line between normal child's play and normal banter and teasing, threatening, taunting, calling names, or starting negative rumors about someone? I mean, it's a fine line. Especially devastating is rejected, rejection. Okay, and you're going to think less of me, but I mean, this thing of, so you're going to dictate who plays with who. I mean, you want to protect kids from harsh rejection and stuff, but you know, my son said to me one time, not everybody can play, and there's too many. Yeah. And then it talks about physical bullying, hitting, pushing, roughing, and you don't need that. You know that. Two types of victims are chosen by the aggressor. One is the passive victim who seems to be helpless and unable to fight back and afraid and alone. The child's an easy victim. The second type is the one who's a provocative victim. And this is what I'm talking about. And this is where you're challenged a little bit more. This one's a little easier. The first one's a little easier to pick out. This one here is a little harder of you know, the one that doesn't fight back. Okay, they provoke the other one. And where is that line between provoking? And sometimes you're going to see these little mouthy kids. You're going to say somebody needs to take a hold of them, but you get to stand in the middle of that. And this will be a much bigger thing to you. One of the things my kids told me one time is you're afraid to say anything to anybody because it could be construed as bullying. And they have so many anti-bullying things in their schools that, like one of my kids said to me, you're afraid to disagree. Because if you disagree, you may be bullying. And they actually taught him a song and everything else about it. It's not, you know, I forget how it goes. He could sing it just great, but that's what he said. If you disagree with somebody, you could be bullying. So I don't know where this goes, but this will be a much bigger scourge to you than even a lot of the abuse things, is this bullying things. Bullies tend to be children whose parents use physical discipline. These children strike back physically or handle problems, may break school rules in opposition to authorities. Dr. Rojas doesn't talk about it here, but one of the things they find in low-income communities is that this is more common because they tend to solve differences with violence by fighting. You and I were taught at a very young age how to rectify, to come to consensus, to get along. Often these folks their parents model for them the opposite, that the way to solve differences is screaming and hollering and fighting. It talks about here, girls use their ability to control other girls through intimidation and exclusion. Lots and lots and lots and lots of cases of that documented. Boys usually do it with physical strength, girls do it by intimidation and exclusion. So the impact of school or bullying mental health for 5 and 7-year-olds says, of course, it has long-term issues. 60% of bullies have at least one criminal conviction by age 24. And I say, Dr. Rojas, don't mislead us here. Those are the very overt bullies. What it does not talk about is the low-level bullying, of intimidation and the low levels of bullying. So now we go into this programs. Let's see here. Tease or negatively gossiped. Found that 67% of children in the study experience. Okay, this I say. Think about this now. 67% of the children in the study experience being teased. Okay, folks, they're being teased or negatively gossiped about during a 1-month span. I don't know. Be a little careful because sometimes that's just normal banter that if one decides it's teased, like my one son would say they were taught, if somebody's teasing you, tell on them. You tell an adult if you're being teased. Kind of tough, you guys. I say this will be a much bigger issue for you than some of the abuse things we've talked about. It talks about here, here's how it establish these norms and stuff. And I don't need to give you bullying stuff because you're going to be bombarded by it in your schools and stuff about anti-bullying stuff. And I personally think it's overdone, but maybe because I was never bullied or something. But here, let me tell you the low form that my one son in middle school is so wanting to fit in that he's allowing these kids to get him to do stuff or go along with stuff that he knows he shouldn't or he normally wouldn't. To me, that's a low level form of bullying. Nobody calls it that. We'll say it's my son's fault, but he's being bullied at a low level. He so wants the approval of these other kids that he's misbehaving in a way that he normally wouldn't. There, I'm done crying about that. It says, can teachers make a difference? Well, it really comes down to you. And my thing is I would teach them, teach them, teach them, teach them. And I would say this, you get on your soapbox somewhat regularly when you see incidents of this teasing or negative talk and teach them like this and say, let me put this up here, and say, we're not going to treat each other that way. We're not going to put each other down in my class. Life is too short. Life is too short to feel bad. We're going to feel good in our class, and we're not going to put each other down. We're not going to say hurtful things. Let's say encouraging things, lift each other up, and have a better, more pleasant environment for all of us. And if you can't do that, then you come and visit with me, and we'll see if we can work on it together. That's how I would handle this, and I would teach it that way over and over. And that's how you handle the little knucklehead stuff. The other thing I was going to, where I want to go back on also, and I had this one time that blew up in my face. Teacher, he snapped my bra snap. He pulled it and snapped it on me. He says, "No, I didn't. She's just making that up." Now what? We have a very strong duty here to report sexual abuse, sexual intimidation. He says he didn't. She says he did. There's no witnesses or nobody's coming forth. What are you going to do? And all I would do, and I could be wrong, but I would get with this young man and say, if I ever hear this again, number one, you deal with my wrath, and number two, I will report you, and you will be dealt with in the severest way we can deal with you. Because one thing you find with these little middle school kids and these young kids is they're not quite sure where the lines are. And my guess is it's happened before and nobody said anything, so he didn't think he thought it was all right. And now, of course, he would be beheaded, killed for doing it. Okay, so that's it. 60% said I've been teased in the last month. Do these things, make it better. Teachers make that difference. Programs that combat bullying and violence in the schools. The National Education Professional Library has published teachers' guides to prevent this. I'm going to ask you to do this. And it looks like this, where here's these programs. This is so interesting to me here is, again, we mentioned American Humane Society as part of this. Signs of child abuse, risk factors, 6 factors of who's at risk. Let me see if I have that. I want you to get that, what those risk factors are. This is on the corporal punishment school who reports maltreatment. Here are the behaviors and signs that they talk about. And you've seen some of this, what those signs of child abuse are, burns and stuff like that. And it's not, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to clip this and ask you to put this on a page by itself. And it just takes you through these different ones. And it'll be a resource for parents, but it'll be a resource for you. Okay. And it even goes on to the secondary level student. Student assume too much responsibility at home. Again, that's a very subjective thing. Parent expect unrealistic and overly controlled behavior. Student and have difficulty conforming to school regulations and policies. So we assume that's abuse. So I want to have a Marlboro at noon. Is that a problem? Does a student have problems communicating with his parents? Don't we all? Does the student have a history of running away in a home or refusing to go home? And sometimes this is abuse, and sometimes it's just that truancy thing. But if you've got knowledge of this, and I've appeared in court more than once on this thing of kids not being running, student act out sexually, and again, in this hyper-sexually age, that's a little tricky also. And does a student lack freedom and friends? Okay. So those are some things. Now here is those 6 things I want you to talk about. Why do abuse, neglect happen? Family income is the first one. And here's 6 of them, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Family income is interesting. Come from families with incomes below the poverty level are 7 times more likely to abuse than those at higher income levels. So that's when I say if you teach a low-income school, all the things we're talking about here will be relevant to you almost every day. If you're in what I'd call a regular school that it has kind of a combination, not as much. Gender. A child's gender has no effect on whether it can be boys and girls. Family size. This surprises me. Children families with 4 or more children are more likely to be neglected or abused. I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience with this, folks, but I have never seen that a bigger family would have more instance of that. But Dr. Rojas Cortez, she doesn't cite it here where this comes from. Oh yeah, it does here too. National Center of Abuse and Neglect identified these factors. Okay. Race and ethnicity, no significant difference in this. You know what has way more than any of these? Race, family size, gender, is income. But not good to talk about. I'm a little surprised she lets this be in here, but it really is a class thing, and it's throughout this whole thing. It is, but it's not okay to talk about that. So again, I'm saying if you're in a low-income school, type of community, urban communities, Department of Health, this exposure to violence, personal experience, exposure to media reports. And I don't think that's as much as if you see violence at home, if that's the kind of culture they live in. So those 6 are what you're going to put up here and what they are. Okay, characteristics of it here too, and these are very interesting. These different models that come in here. Psychological models: a lack of empathy distinguishes abusive parents. Sociological model: cultural attitudes toward violence, social stress, family size are factors related to child abuse. And then the other ones over here, the characteristics. Parent-child interaction model: the parent lacks skill in interacting with their child, disciplining when teaching them appropriate behavior. And so it talks about those models and how to deal with those. Okay, professionally determine the likelihood of abuse and neglect. The parents fail to show up for appointments. They stay away from school. We talked about some of the reasons they stay away from school. Do the parents have unrealistically high expectations for themselves and their child? Ooh. So where is that line of unrealistic and realistic? We just had our parent-teacher conferences and teacher saying he's not reaching his potential. So yeah, do the parents have expectations for the child that are inconsistent and appropriate for the child's age? That was more common. We have a little trouble with that with sports, that we expect a little more than we're getting. The parents become aggressive or abusive when school personnel want to talk about the child's problem. Kindergarten cop, ever seen that part there? Here, kindergarten cop on abuse.
Sorry, Zach's late. Car wouldn't start. You're a good boy. I love you.
Hi, Jan. What's the matter? Oh, no.
I fell down again.
Hey, wait a minute.
I forgot to close the door to the basement, and Zach had a bad fall. The doctor says it looks much worse than it really is.
Yeah, sure, you all say the same thing. The kid fell down the steps. Don't you have anything better to say than that?
It's true. Look, I don't have to justify myself to you. You don't have any right talking to me like that.
Hey, how you doing? You must be the Mr. Kimball we hear so much about.
You hit the kid, I hit you. You bastard. Oh, you're not worth it. I'm pressing charges against you.
Excuse me, everybody.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have hit the man, especially in front of the children. It was a mistake.
There, that gives you some thing about show little interest in the child's activities. Yeah. So why is there abuse? Inappropriate expectations, lack of empathy, and I'm going to ask you to come into that also here. And just make one sentence with each of these, if you would. What number are we on? About 11 here. This is your 11th entry. This comes from here. In each of these parent-child role reversals, they claim this is a this happens in addiction also. And my oldest son had a kid in his class, has a kid still in his class, but from early on he parented her that she absolutely took no direction from him. I remember we were in basketball practice one time, and she came and said, "Well, now what do you want to do? You know, now where should we go?" Or, you know, and I remember one time when he told her to stay out. She came in the gym, and he said, "Stay out," and so she went back out and stayed. I'm saying, okay, I'm kind of the other way. That would be the last thing I would do if my kid told me to. My fourth grade son told me to stay out of the gym. Okay, so there's those. And then this developmental policies, it kind of ends with that. Some do's and don'ts, communications with family, some do's and don'ts about this. And again, folks, I hope this doesn't become an issue for you. And if it does, seek help, somebody above your pay grade on dealing with any of this stuff, that if it becomes part of that. And then we go to this, and I'm going to have you also bring this in. These developmental policies also to be reported. Yes. Yeah, and like I said, we talked about this, that if you see this and it's not that hard, you may struggle a little bit saying, is this a normal falls or is there some abuse? But that's why we talked about before, those things that you ask questions and see what's consistent. All school centers need to have their own policies and training programs, and most schools will cover this in their orientation when you become a new employee in that district. That's when you expect to see this. Certainly, and it should be online on their websites. And this is about talking with the family needs, and how the school can help. Not a fun thing. Parents will not be excited to talk about this. Obviously, the common thread through all this is that you are protecting the children. They should not be or feel threatened by this talk. School's legal reporting obligations, and this is what you saw with the kindergarten cop, that he said, "I'm reporting you." That's what that was about. And these things here, and I want just a brief description of these things here. This is 12. The last one. Okay. The Abused Child, Chapter 11.